We treat the National Health Service as very much something to be revered. But
yes.
was that something that Margaret particularly wanted to? Was she angry at the time at the way anybody outside of the norms in society was treated by the National Health in those days? Do you think is that something she really wanted to come out of the film?
Well, I think she was making a statement also about. I mean, at that time. To be unmarried and have a child. I mean, interesting thing about this particular project is that parallel to this, Ken Loach was directing things like Cathy Come Home and Up the Junction, which is on the other side of the river in Battersea, whereas this girl lives in Marylebone. And we were trying, there's a distinct contrast in their lifestyles, but attitudes were very conservative. I mean, to be a single mother at that time, even now possibly, I don't know, but I mean, then it was pretty hard to be single and bring up a child. So I think that was the comment she was trying to make about the whole idea of being, especially in that kind of, it's a sort of semi-privileged world, and yet you have to put up with all that. The reality is, you may be in that wonderful, comfortable flat, but when you go out into the real world, there are people out there waiting to be dealt with medically and everything else.
And then because you're English, you can't really deal with the emotional... I mean, she never talks to anybody about herself, does she?
That's right, and her parents even, you know.
Oh, yes, dreadful parents.
Well, we'll come back to that, actually. But I touched on this in my introduction, but your first feature film, Waris, and I believe your first feature film, Ian. So
well,
can you tell us how that sort of came about?
Well, first of all, yes, I was very nervous. I've been doing a lot of television, but this was my first feature, and I realized that, my skills were on the line. But I was very well served. And then I said, well, I've got to get some people that I can really relate to. And Ian and I, of course, known each other. We were at university together, and at that time he was doing a lot of theatre. And I remember going to see you and saying, please do this. And you said, oh, I don't know about this. He said, I'm a theatre actor. I don't want to be in films. So, so there we are. And I sort of begged him. I said, for heaven's sakes, help me out. And anyway, Ian agreed. And then I brought all our pals in. We had Eleanor Braun, and we had even Roger Hammond, a glimpse of him in the distance as a friend. So I got all my sort of cohorts and friends to help me out. That's how Ian got to be in it.
We were at Cambridge doing a lot of directing and acting, with Margaret Drabble acting.
Yes.
Before she'd written a line of a novel, and she played violin, I played Toby Belch for you. And then she married Clive Swift, another undergraduate actor, and Clive went off to have a first season at Stratford, and Maggie dutifully went along as the wife and found herself being put into the Royal Shakespeare Company as an actor, and she understudied Vanessa Redgrave, whose mother is in this film. And she made friends with the late John Barton, who was a director at the RSC. And he lived in London at 14 de Walden Court behind the BBC. And Maggie stayed there. And I think in that apartment wrote this book, The Millstone. And when I walked onto the set for the first time, because that flat and the lift there was all in Shepperton, it wasn't on location. I said, well, I've been in this flat. And I had, because the designer, I think Tony Curtis, had asked Maggie places she'd lived in and so on, and went to John Barton's flat and reproduced it exactly. So that just, and whenever I used to see John, I would think, oh my God, this is the Millstone. Everything's the layout's exactly the same, and the elevator is still there. And I was thinking about that because, of course, John's just died, and Clive Swift was at the funeral. So circles being completed.
And Waris just touched on something I wanted to ask you about, Ian. He mentioned that that you regarded yourself as a theatre actor at the time. Is that true? You'd done David Copperfield for the BBC in 1966, I believe. So you did have some considerable television experience
Yes, and
behind
that's
you.
pretty well it. No, I'd just been an actor, a theatre actor. Sorry. I think of actors as people who work in the theatre. Yes, and I was a bit nervous about this because I wouldn't have a clue what to do. I mean, I didn't know the routine, how it all worked. Nobody teaches you that. Didn't teach me. So, yes, learning on the job, and I was very lucky. What an odd accent I was using. I mean, frightfully. And the fact that he was gay, we wouldn't have used that word in those days, probably. I mean, because Maggie uses gay in
a different context,
old sense, doesn't she, in the script? Bisexual, let's say, and we never talked about that, did we? I mean, I suppose we both knew it, being gay ourselves, that there were people like George around, but it wasn't a big feature. But this was a movie and a novel about an unmarried mother. That was it. Not who had a bisexual one-night stand. That was just. Well, Maggie had a finger on the pulse of those times, I think.
Given the very different attitudes at the time to being homosexual, bisexual, etc., did it give you any cause for concern taking the part?
No, I don't think it crossed my mind. But now you tell me that I didn't immediately jump at it. Perhaps I thought I shouldn't be playing. No, I don't remember it really.
We didn't actually think like that at all. I mean, in the sense that what we did do, because at that time you simply did not become explicit about any of the things.
No.
But what I actually, in all fairness, seeing it again, and I haven't seen it since, for a very long time, I thought you did marvellously. Absolutely, considering. No, seriously.
We should do something
I mean,
else.
considering, I thought it was so absolutely. You were so in your role and totally at ease with what you were doing, and there were wonderful little things going on. I kept thinking, he's doing it himself. I didn't. I may have set the situation, but you literally played every single moment, I think, in relation to the situation, and I thought it worked.
They couldn't talk to each other, could they, that kind?
No, but I mean, I was trying to think, did I ever tell you? I mean, there were all these wonderful pauses and silences, and after you've had sex and there's not any kind of communication yet.
Yes.
I thought all that worked. I can't remember giving you any of those notes. But
did you give Sandy any notes?
Well, yes, because I mean, in all fairness to her, this film would not have been made without her. So let's give her some credit. This is a very famous American actress who'd just been nominated for her performance in Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. She was a very idiosyncratic actress. She was known for the way she spoke and the way she stumbled her sentence. And now she's playing a middle-class English girl. And it took me I had to work a lot with her at try and contain some of the natural things that she came up with, partly because, as I kept saying to her, American girl, different, Sandy. British girls are even more different. You've got to be much more this, you've got to be much more that, because she's got this family, this ultra socialist type family, middle class.
Well, it is remarkable. I mean, because her acting was full of not very convincing mannerisms, I thought. So she was pretending to make it up as it went along. So she would do a lot of things in between, and I think you've cut around them very well.
Yes,
and,
a lot of it.
I think she was a dear and lovely to me. She lived with Jerry Mulligan, the jazz musician, and she lived with a menagerie of cats and dogs. I mean, literally hundreds. I never saw them, but that's really what she wanted to talk about. But I think just a little bit less of the victim and more of the suffragette I would have liked, because she's a very strong girl, isn't she?
Yeah.
Now, you can be strong and tentative, but I just wish sometimes... I mean, like when she cries, it's wonderful, isn't it? She's just willfully screaming her head off to get what she wants.
It's quite a big ask for an American to play such a quintessentially British
Very much
part,
so,
isn't it?
absolutely,
And
I
I was
agree.
going to ask you, actually, was that partly the attraction for this project for you? Because, as we were saying, at this time, British film was going very much in the direction of more sort of kitchen sink, working class
Ken
dramas
Loach.
like Saturday Night, Sunday Morning,
yes,
and
yes,
Loneliness
those.
of the Long Distance Runner, and so on. Here's a film that comes along that actually is criticising specifically middle class values. And was it that actually attracted you to it in many respects?
I wish I could say that was the situation. I was just actually thrilled to be offered a feature.
Yeah.
I mean, at that time I'd been doing a lot of serious television, and the fact that somebody saw my work and thought that they could actually give me a feature. And when I read it, of course, I identified totally with Maggie. I mean, I understood the world I was dealing with.
Yes.
So it wasn't as if it was totally alien. I knew that world. I knew the people who existed in it. The only thing I had to deal with is the fact that I had a very important but idiosyncratic American lady to play the lead. Without her, we couldn't have made the film.
No.
And actually, an interesting thing you say that, if she'd been more militant and more perhaps suffragette, I don't know whether it would have sustained that length of film, because she's got to be fragile in a certain way. She's big. The whole character is about somebody who thinks she's. I mean, don't forget, the first thing she does is to try and drink a whole bottle of gin and try and have an abortion, which self-abort, which is kind of
That's true, yeah.
kind of tough.
Well, she grows up, doesn't
But
she?
if you'd made her into too much of that, I think you would have said, "Oh no, wait a minute, come on, girl."
Which is why Waris Hussein directs and I stick to acting. No, you're absolutely right. Absolutely right.
I think
I guess I just imagining Vanessa, what she would have been like in that part.
Yes, but Vanessa
She'd
would
have been vulnerable, wouldn't she?
She would have been vulnerable too, actually, in a different way.
Yeah.
Vanessa does play vulnerable, even though she's being tough.
Yeah.
That's part of her art.
Yeah.
I think what's fascinating about the film also is it's also seems to be about everybody's inability to actually commit to relationships. So it's almost as if Margaret Drabble is saying, yes, these wonderful sexual freedoms of the 1960s come along, but there are people that get left behind by it. And Rosamund seems to be such a person. Do you think that's something that she really wanted to bring out?
I think it's got to do with, I mean, there are many layers to this particular story. I think it's not just a simple story about a woman deciding to have a child. I think it's to do with becoming aware of who you are through the process of making a decision that once you've made it, you've got to bear the consequences. The characters say that in the film. A number of people say to her, you do realise what you're in for. And the fact is, it's a question of whatever we decide in our lives, we have to bear the consequences of our actions. And that's what, I mean, thank God there was no melodrama in the sense that the child didn't die or anything. You know what I mean? Oh, this is what you get if you decide to be single. No, it's to do with having to cope with the consequences. And I think what's so touching about it is at the end you're waiting for her to tell George that he's the father. And again, it was I thought the way you guys did it, and partly I guess was to do with the fact we all did that in that consequence, but you felt that any minute she's going to say, by the way, you know, this is your kid, and she doesn't do it, and she shuts the door, you know.
Well, I wish George had been the sort of boy who could have said, is it mine?
Well, that's the point.
But, you know,
I mean, what was George's other life? We don't know.
Maggie and I knew each other very well at Cambridge, but we were never intimate in the exchange of views on anything, or being indiscreet together, or having a long, you know, midnight conversation together. We just did a bit of acting together. But of course she's a wise bird, and she was looking at me at all the time that we were being sort of friends. But she didn't know anything about me, and she never once, we have never had a conversation with Maggie about me being gay and the fact that we've been rather intimate in plays together.
But Ian, at that time...
And Clive said,
Yeah.
Clive, her husband, said, you know Maggie based George on you, don't you? That's who she was thinking of when she was writing the book.
Oh, right.
So that's how Maggie saw me, but I wasn't like that at all. All the Englishness. Maggie and I, English, well, she's Yorkshire and I'm Lancashire,
Yeah.
and never the twain shall meet, really. That's all part of what strikes me the film is in part about.
But that's a good thing, though. I mean, Yorkshire, you being Yorkshire...
No, Lancashire.
Lancashire, she's being Yorkshire, and me being Indian for us.
Yes.
Come on. That's already a combination.
Yes.
But the fact is, look, that's a very interesting point. I didn't ever think I could in any way express myself on my gay side at Cambridge at all. You didn't either, did you? I mean, I never saw you in that context, so... I mean, I saw you as Ian McKellen,
I know.
fellow
Well,
student. We never did
very,
any of those things because it just wasn't... I mean, at that
We
time...
were very, very repressed.
We were very repressed.
And all these people.
I was
repressed.
I actually had girlfriends visiting, trying to make myself, you know...
Did you?
Yeah.
Any luck?
No.
But I think that's one of the really successful things about the film, though, is that without you saying anything overtly, and it's so subtly done, particularly in your direction and Ian's performance, there's a sense not only that Rosamund is quite a sad character, but there's also a sense that despite his great success as a media personality and being this newscaster, that there's also a sense that George is quite a sad character at heart and maybe lives his life in the shadows.
I mean, what do you know about those newsreaders other than their hairstyle and their ties and their accents and their little idiosyncrasies? You know nothing about. I mean, of course, there's Network, that film and now play, where a newsreader goes off the rails. But no, it's a perfect job for George to have. Everybody knows him, everybody likes him, and nobody knows anything about him.
And he
all.
does say, I lead a secret life, at one point. You never quite know. And then he says at the end, well, you know, I've had a life, I know, that's all over now. And I thought, well, maybe he had
Can
an
you
affair.
think they were having sex without protection, these two?
That's true.
They were old enough to know better.
It was a bit awkward with the books falling off the sofa. It wasn't exactly a sort of duvet scene, was it?
No.
That was all on the TV telling you about how
But
far
there would have been
films
no
were.
story, would there, if there'd been a condom?
And Maurice, this is a very rare example of Margaret Drabble adapting her novels into a screenplay. Did the screenplay arrive fully formed, or did you have to do much work on it?
That's a very nice question, because I'll tell you something. I think she's one of the few novelists who have adapted their own work into a screenplay. Mostly writers sell their works and somebody then works on it, and it may turn out to be totally different, and the writers as well, you know, I've sold it so I don't really think about it anymore. She actually not only adapted it, but I thought she did an amazing job. It's her first and only ever screenplay, and I thought she followed her instincts with great integrity and with a sense of humour. There's a lot of humour in that dialogue.
Oh, yeah.
And she has that ironic and humorous way of dealing with it. So I give her full marks for what she did. And when I got the script, there were very few moments of my sitting with her and saying, oh, can we do this or can we do that? Very minor in the way we approach the script.
And they're all outsiders in their own way. Rosamund is struggling with being a single mother at a time when it's very difficult. George is struggling in certain respects with his sexuality in a very private way. Mm-hmm. They're outsiders, and I'm just wondering, again, whether there was something in that attracted you as a director, given that you yourself come from an Indian background, and sort of were very much the exception in the industry at the time.
I was. However, I didn't go around with a sort of burden on my back or anything like that. I just felt that I tried to... use whatever knowledge I had of being a director. I mean, the privilege I had at Cambridge was that we had a very good theatre tradition, didn't we? We had good theatre backgrounds, and so I honestly didn't think of myself as in specific ways an Indian. That actually had been overcome at the BBC when I was the television director. All that fear that I had of trying to prove myself had already been dealt with. So by the time I got to this space in my life, I was more confident. I hadn't got that self-consciousness of, oh my goodness, am I, doing okay? No, I was just anxious to get it right and to justify the fact that these two producers, who, by the way, it was their first serious film. They only did films like The House That Dripped Blood and all these horror films with, Christopher Lee and what's his name, they always played the horror film, Peter Cushing. That was their modus vivendi. This was their first time they made a film of this kind of seriousness or with that kind of focus.
And just going back to Cambridge, which you mentioned there, why do you think it was such a hotbed of amazing talent at that time in the early 60s? And I'm wondering, with the criticism that there is for Cambridge now for taking its intake from what many people regard as quite a narrow middle class base or from public school, etc., do you feel that you would both have got into Cambridge today?
I doubt it. Yes, no. I got in through an audition. I actually did a piece of Shakespeare for my future supervisor, who wasn't interested in my academic achievements. Thank goodness, because they didn't exist. But why? Well, I've always thought Cambridge had one up on Oxford in that there was an undergraduate run theatre, the Amateur Dramatic Club in Cambridge, where most plays were done, weren't they?
Yeah.
The Mahler Society, then twice a year, would go and play in the professional theatre in Cambridge, the arts. But so we were running this theatre. People were designing for it. They were writing plays for it. They were directing them. It was a powerhouse, really. And then when you had someone as alert and brilliant as John Barton as directing plays, preceded not many years before by Peter Hall, who was then an undergraduate. And then it was just, I think, the confluence of the chance that so many people who are very keen on acting and performing were there together. I mean, forget acting and directing. I mean, look at the comedy stuff. Peter Cook and David Frost and John Fortune and Eleanor doing Footlights. Well, yeah, I was never allowed in there. No. And out of that came Beyond the Fringe and also and all the other later stuff. The Flying Circus. Weren't they Cambridge? John Cleese, wasn't he Cambridge? I don't know. I'm sure
Yes.
they were.
Yeah.
So yeah, but the setup was all ready for you, and there were enough dons around who didn't mind you spending your time.
There's George Rylands, don't forget
And
him.
George Rylands above us all, as it were, the senior don, yes.
And being a TV director and working in television as an actor as well, is that a great training ground for moving into films? Do you both think, in the sense that you learn your craft and you learn to work really fast, so that when you get to do feature films, it's actually a little bit easier?
Yes, because the television dramas that I did before this were all shot in the studio, mainly with 4 cameras, with cables all over the place and no way of being flexible in the way that people are now. Everything had to be organized. I mean, Ian and I did Hedda Gabler together, and you remember when I tried to do something innovative, which was a 360-degree shot. In those days, sets only had 3 sides, and this had a 4-sided set with walls moving in order to accommodate a camera as we did it.
Can you hear any of the dialogue above the sound of
Oh, no,
scenery
you
being
can
moved?
indeed. No, it's
Yeah.
all on very well
Well,
organized.
you're in for a treat.
It was very, if you actually look at that and think, my God, a wall moved here, and I'm shooting from behind the piano, and then when you look back at the piano, the wall is there. In today's market, so I'd done all that. The discipline of shooting continuously was already in one's head. So when you get the I mean, if you actually, one of the things that I looked at today thinking, my God, I don't think I could do that anymore. The amount of times I shot people going down hallways and into rooms and coming out of rooms, that I don't know whether I could still do that. Partly was that was a part of my television heritage that allowed me to be so flexible with a single camera that I could never have done before.
And how about from the actor's perspective, Ian? Is it different at all acting in front of the film camera to the television camera, or just the same?
That's the sort of question that you have people write books about. I don't know. Yes, yes. The advantage of film is that you can do it many, many times. That's not what I remember about this. I suspect we were on quite a tight schedule.
Oh, we had very few retakes. I mean, we did maybe 2 or 3 takes per setup, but not anymore.
I graduated to 23 takes, with Peter Jackson. But and I should say that the dog, Maggie, sitting on my knee in Regent's Park, was my own. Yes. Well, and my partner's dog. But I longed to know who was that wonderful baby in the waiting room that cried and cried. What had you done to it?
I had no idea. I was wondering.
And is he or she here today? Because you'd be 53, I was just working out.
Octavia must be.
Where is Octavia? Who
I
was
don't
Octavia?
know. The little girl who played Octavia.
Where is she?
Who knows?
This is the time for her to come on.
If only we could find her.
Yes. Well, we could put it out, and would you find out?
Now, you mentioned working with Waris on Hedda Gabler, and all the actors that I've spoken to over the season, you get a real sense that actors love working with Waris because not only is he brilliant as a technical director, but that he really understands actors and knows how to get the best out of them performance-wise. So I just wondered whether you...
Well, he's without temperament of a negative sort, and thank God, always calm. And, often a little bit nervous, but excitable. That's nice. You like that. So that if there's something good going on, he is positive, and if there isn't, he can correct it. But I've always felt with Waris, as a person and director, he's going right to the heart of the matter, and he won't be happy until he's rooted that out. And so there's nothing surface here. It's deep.
Yes, that certainly comes across in this particular film. Lots and lots of layers and depth.
Well, it was retitled Thank You All Very Much, which I hated, but that was the way the distribution people in America decided to call it that. I don't understand why, because A Touch of Love, to me, makes more sense. And I think probably the scene that works for me best, funnily enough, is the scene that the two of them, when they actually get together on the sofa, because it is about a tentative getting together of two people, and that's it's also my favorite scene because we shot it in one take. I'll never forget that. Very close, and then we go all the way up on a crane. Oh my God, is this going to work? And it did. So that's my favorite scene. That's why.
And of course, the first title was the title of the novel, The Millstone.
The Millstone was the original title of the book, which of course nobody would have understood commercially, I think. No, at that time she was not as well known as she is now, and it's very funny. Actually, Rachel Kempson, who played the lady, the nurse who was trying to advise her, Rachel, Vanessa's mum, I'd worked with her on a couple of television shows, and we got on terribly well, and I offered her the part of the mother. And she said, "Oh no, Waris, I've played so many middle-class mums, and it's possibly me anyway. I'd rather do something else." So she played she asked to play the other role. So, I did go to my various pals. Penelope was not somebody I knew at that time, but Maggie Tyzak was, who played the very nasty sister. So I did get people who I sort of knew to give me some kind of support. The casting had a bit of that in it. No, I don't think there was that situation at all because, to be honest with you, we could not have financed this picture without Sandy. And it's still the situation today. You have to have some kind of person who you can actually say, I have this person in my film, and then the financiers will move in and say, okay, that's great. But that's the way it is. Films are not financed unless they're very low budget or something without somebody's name on it. So Sandy, I mean, I was totally okay with it because I'd seen her. I knew I'd watched her, of course, in many roles before she came over. But what I enjoyed about her was that she totally dedicated herself to getting this as right as possible. And one has to give her full marks for that.
Yes, about 6 months ago, when Jonathan Mumbis said to me, rehearsing King Lear, very good in, but just surprise yourself.
That's a good one.
Don't know what you're going to do next, because the character doesn't. Just surprise yourself. So, and I've taken that to heart, and it has absolutely changed my attitude to acting. Shakespeare, anyway. Because in Shakespeare, everybody knows what's coming next. The audience can recite it with you. So, surprise, take the pause, have the idea, in the moment. So that's.
I can't say anything because I was.
Have actors ever given you a note? I mean, surprise, said something helpful, or?
I'm trying to think.
Perhaps no.
Look, I might add that having had the privilege of working with you, far for anything else, I have worked with some greats. I've worked with Larry Olivier, I've worked with John Gielgud.
Proper actors.
And in all fairness, on both sides, the only person I've ever worked with who I said, the first time I met her was Sybil Thorndike, and I said, oh, Dame Sybil, I'm so honoured to work with you. She said, darling, don't be honoured, just direct me.
Yes.
Well,
there we are.
So there we are.
And that's what you've done.
That's what I did. There was no question of being in awe.
No.
Because if you're in awe of somebody, you just get tongue-tied, and then you look as if you don't know what you're doing, and then, of course, they're going to say, oh, my God, what have I got myself into? So, no, try not to do that. So I learned my lesson by it's very democratic, this business, if you get on with everybody. I have had one or two places that I've worked with somebody, but I won't mention names, and that way it was a tough climb. But in most of my career, thank God, I've met and worked with some of the greatest people in the world, and I'm very thankful for it because I learned, and at the same time we got on terribly well.
And as film directors have a really, really, really bad time of it, I think. I mean, a theatre director, there's plenty of you can always call somebody up. You can go and hire a pub and do it. Well, I suppose you could make your film on your tablet, couldn't you? But before all that technology, you arrive on the film very late in the process of preparation to meet a director who's perhaps given up 2 years of his life to make something happen. I mean, I'm talking to John Schlesinger, who at the end of his life he said, I spent all my time preparing to make movies which don't happen. I think people like John Schlesinger and Waris Hussein should be given pensions by the state to just make any film that they want to do, because it's bound to be of note, and would be wonderful for the rest of us to get involved, and for you to see. I know it's not a waste of time raising money, but goodness me, you've got other things you could be doing.
True.
True.
I think we'd all second that.